Action, we're here. We are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. And I want to introduce everybody to say hi. We have some people here in the audience today. This is so much fun. It's Beat Week. Jess has confessed. I don't know if I have anything to say about beats. Watch what Jess does. I mean, mark my word, because Jess just knows how to do it. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Jess. How are you?
Hey,
Lily.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are
Amber
you?
Rose.
Hello.
ARJ.
Hello, Al.
I'm Al. And sitting to my right, a special guest, Doug Kearney. Snaps for Doug.
Yay.
Thank you. Doug is hanging out here at the Writer's House. We did a ModPo Minute that turned out to be ModPo 15 minutes on Leroy Jones and Miri Baraka's How You Sound. And that was so much fun. Doug, welcome. Thank you.
Great to be back.
Oh, it's really good to see you. Davey, hello.
Hi, Al.
Jason, hello.
Hello, Al.
Claire, you don't have a mic, but hello. Oh my gosh. We have all kinds of people here. Greg Gallagher came up from the DC area. Mandana Chaffa came down from New York. Jeff Johnson is here. Hello, Jeff. Good to see you. Jeff isn't here for the ModPo webcast. Jeff's here to hang out with Doug, I have a feeling, but you're going to get into the ModPo stuff. Briar is here. Briar, hello. Anna is on the phones today. Chris has been fired from that job. No, he hasn't. Just Anna likes to do the phone. It's like old times. We have Erica coming here from Bard College in the Hudson Valley. Hi, Erica.
Hey, Al.
How are you today?
Oh.
I'm great. How are you?
That was not said with much conviction. Things are blowing up at Bard, it looks like. There's some stuff going on. Some protests.
There's a bit of stuff.
Yeah. We don't have to get into that. But anyway, I know you have to go with a picket sign soon, but we'll hold on to you as long as possible. Jake Marmer from Palo Alto. Hey, Jake.
Hey, Al.
How are you?
Good.
Where is your beat beret? You're wearing a cap. You're wearing a Ukrainian cap instead of a...
It's the new beat.
It's the new beat. Okay. Max McKenna from Chicago. Hi, Max.
Hi, Al.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Do you remember when we
cold.
originally recorded the videos for the beats? Everyone wore black, and you wore like a red shirt but a black beret. No, you wore a black shirt and a red beret.
I wore a red shirt and a black beret.
Okay.
I revisit this every year. It's my greatest shame.
But you weren't rocking the mustache back in 2012.
No, I was not.
Okay, that's a neutral comment. Amaris Kuchansky. Hey, Funko.
Hello.
Hi, Amaris.
Hello.
Somebody's playing the sound through their computer. Hello, Jason. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good. Okay, there's someone on the phone already. Wow. But I want to start by quoting Bob Bright, who's like a superstar, another Rookie of the Year, just praising the community. And then I want to quote Ron Jimenez from the forums, and we'll get started with the phone call. Okay, here's what Bob Bright said. Well, hi, Al. Well, I'd say that what I love about ModPo is that even though I haven't actually met anyone F to F, face-to-face, I feel that I'm part of the community. The activities are well considered in the sense that posting a response to an initial reading obliges you to engage with it in some depth, which means that when you come to the video discussions, the insights, always excellent, meaning by us in the videos, I think, afforded by those involved in the close reading of the poem in question allow further reflection on the work already done previously. The fact that the teaching assistants are generally the same faces, meaning from video to video, and then 8 years later here, can be held vis-a-vis the poems, the fact that the teaching assistants are generally the same faces helps the course participant get a sense of how different views can be held vis-a-vis the poems being considered, and also get to know a little bit about each participant's character. I don't know what that means exactly, which in turn helps understand their views to some extent. The additional materials are good, ModPo Plus. The way in which feedback is provided on participants' essays and forum posts by peers, mentors, and TAs is supportive and constructive. And in a nutshell, the whole kit and caboodle is a pleasure. Thank you, Bob, and thank you for everybody who acknowledged the labor, the effort, the intellectual affect that goes into what we've done. Thank you, Bob. All right, here's Ron Jimenez. Then we're going to go to the phone, and it's a switcheroo on the phone because the phone person is not at first going to ask a question, but is going to have to respond to Ron Jimenez. Wow. Okay. Who is on the phone, by the way?
It's Allison.
Allison. Hey, Allison.
Yes, you can throw anything at Allison. She can handle it.
Hey, Allison. How are you? It's 9 a.m. out there where you are, right? You're still out on the West Coast.
Well done.
Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Okay, it's hard to keep up with you, but I know you're out there somewhere. So here's what Ron Jimenez says. So I'm going to ask Allison to respond first. Then I'm going to ask Doug and Amber Rose to respond to what it is. They don't even know what it is. Okay, here's what Ron Jimenez said. So enjoyed just listening to Howl, Ginsberg's Howl, while reading simultaneously. So reading and listening. And by the way, this was not something that could be done until recent years because either you were at a reading with Ginsberg, and typically people were not holding on to texts, especially in the early years, or you were reading it. Ron asks a question that I think we should ignore a little bit because I'm really interested in this reading and listening. Ron asks, is there anything to make of the difference in word choices, a few, between the spoken and written version? That is an interesting question, but I think more primarily interesting, Allison first, is the experience of listening and reading together, listening only, reading only, doing one before the other, all that. Allison, anything, then Amber Rose, then Doug.
Thank you so much, Al, for such a lovely introduction, and thanks for a great question, because I think when we started with Stein, we sort of opened up this conversation about listening and speaking and how poetry is not something that is just static on the page, that when you read it aloud, you can actually sort of change some of the dynamics. And I think his question about the written versus the oral brings up a lot to think about. And what I'd like to offer as, my sort of way, the Beats Week is one of my favorite weeks because beat poetry is how I got into poetry in the first place. Allen Ginsberg, it's so awesome that we opened with Howl because that was the first poem that I read by him, and I was like, what is this magic, And so what I'd like to say about the Beat Week, too, is that the beats have been around in ModPo before we got to this week. We read Allen Ginsberg in week 2, A Supermarket in California. I'd encourage you to go read that poem aloud in the spirit of this conversation. And try to, understand where Allen Ginsberg is coming from.
Allison, what the fuck? I mean, that was like, you called, you didn't know what the question was going to be, and you just did this perfect paragraph. What the hell? 9 o'clock. What are you drinking? That was great. Thank you, Allison.
Nothing. It's just like California sunshine. But thanks for letting me be here. And Allen
you,
Ginsberg
we love you
is
so much.
obviously resonating, because the fact that I called to bring him up and bring up A Supermarket in California, I mean, he just made it easy.
Wow. You're amazing. Thank you, Allison. Thanks for calling. Have
Thanks,
a great day.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Wow. I mean, Doug, what a community. Holy cow. Okay. So as we turn to Amber Rose for a response to this issue of the reading and the listening, I'll just quote Holly York, who is at least used to be at Emory University in Atlanta, and she tweets, so excited that Doug Kearney is there, as are we. Amber Rose, reading, listening.
Yeah, I also really love this question, and I think it's rare. We don't always get the opportunity to read and listen at the same time, which is one of the great things about the way that ModPo presents its materials. Usually you're having to choose one or the other, but I think what's important about doing those things together is you can it allows you to sort of reflect on how your brain processes the information of a poem. So when you're just reading, I think the way that we're trained to read is to sort of try to piece things together and sort of decipher things for exactly how one word lines up with the other. We try to follow, the range of a sentence. We look for the period. We look for these sort of markers to help us get a grounding on our understanding. But when you're listening, there's this other kind of textural information that you're getting through sound that is informing sort of a feeling beyond literal comprehension. But when you're engaging in both of those things at the same time, you can kind of have this third piece of your brain that's just sort of like, wow, look at this rupture that's going on. I'm feeling these things. My eyes are wanting to sort of articulate exactly what this line is saying. And then I'm having this other third experience where I'm sort of just wallowing in the conflict, the productive conflict of those two modes of interacting with the poem.
Thank you, Amber Rose. Doug, where do we go from there?
Well, I mean, and in that productive conflict, right? I mean, there's a rupture in the sense of the finality of the printed text in that moment, right? Because you immediately have this moment of like, well, like, is this vocal performance, does it precede this printed version? So was this an earlier draft? Or is the vocal performance a revision of this printed version? Like, is this what he really means, or is the text what he really meant? Like, and that changes the kind of sense of permanence of the text, right? At what point is it an improvisation? Like, you immediately have this moment where you're thinking, was that a mistake? Okay, if that was a mistake, which one is wrong? And so you have this kind of tension that, again, ruptures that sense of permanence, that sense of time, I think. I mean, I remember going to see an opera once and watching, like, listening to the opera, you know, the singer sing this long, like, melismatic phrase, and it, like, went on for like a minute, and then the super title comes up and it just goes like, I love you. And I mean, like, this suspension of time against the text. So, like, suddenly you're thrust into a sense of, like, time passing when you're hearing, where time gets suspended when you're reading. So I think it's all about this experience of time. And with Howl in particular, where you're dealing with these long lines that use these hanging indents in some places, but the line breaks are largely dictated by the width of your margins. You're constantly in this space of suspension of time. Like, how wide would these pages have to be to not have a line break? Where is the breath even represented graphically?
Right. Gee, Doug, it's almost as if you've thought about this issue a few times before. You know, I should say that Doug is a poet performer. Among his books, Someone Took They Tongues, Buck Studies, Patter Way Back, and of course his MOOC, his Massive Open Online Course, which is a cousin to ModPo, called Sharpened Visions. And so he's very much a pal, a sibling to our project. Thank you. What we're going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of Ginsberg. You know, we're getting so many calls. Chris, you know, the minute we say Anna is answering the phone, the calls start to
Chris
come
has
in.
had a long week.
Right?
I know.
We went all the way to Boston. You were there. Nobody called. Anna's on the phone, and there's people trying to get through. The operators are busy. I'm
She's a
teasing.
celebrity, Al, you know.
I'm teasing. Okay. Yes, so let's find out who's on the phone, but I once again, I want to ask this person to go along with what we're doing rather than to ask a question, and my computer is freaking out. Okay. Anna, who do we have?
We're
Anna?
about to patch through the caller.
Who is it?
It's Sophia Naz.
Sophia Naz. Well, we did a poem in a ModPo Minute. This is like a big reunion. Sophia, hi. Sophia, can you...
Hang on one sec.
Okay.
Sorry.
Anna has to relearn how to do this. Sophia, how are you?
I'm great.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm
Good.
doing great here in California in beautiful sunshine.
It is.
Okay, and no
And,
fires up there in the north?
No, we had a scary time for 3 days where they turned off the power in a preemptive move to prevent any more fires, which was not so great, but
Yeah.
we survived. And
And you're
no fires.
rebuilding. You're rebuilding after the fire, the devastating fire.
Rebuilding, yes.
Wow. Well, great. So Sophia Naz, a poet, has joined us. Sophia, I'm going to turn the tables on you. What we're going to do is we're going to listen to a little bit of Ginsberg. I'm going to set it up. Then I'm going to ask Jake, Amaris, and Max and Jess to comment on it. Okay. Then I'm going to
Okay,
ask.
great.
Then I'm going to ask Sophia and Doug to just comment on the comments. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play Ginsberg reading America. It's probably the first time he read it. It's at a club. People are drinking. You can actually hear Kerouac there. So he was on the West Coast for this. If you know your beats, you can actually hear who's shouting out. He reads America, and the audience is very rowdy, and it seems to affect his reading of the poem. And I guess what I want to presuppose in your comments, hoping that you'll respond to, Jake, Max, Amaris, Jess, and then Sophia and Doug, what I want to presuppose is that the poem in its first performance actually got affected by the co-creators who were its audience because they were responding to the humor of it. When he reads this in a studio, it's very serious, America. But when he reads it before his pals, his friends who are drunk, it becomes very antic. So here we go.
America, I haven't read the newspapers for months. Every day somebody goes on trial for murder. America, I feel sentimental about the Wobblies. America, I used to be a communist when I was a kid. I'm not sorry. I smoke marijuana every chance I get. Only $2.27. I don't want to work. Maybe it's looking for the job. I can't study anymore. I'll never teach for a living. I sit in my house for days on end without going out. When I go to Chinatown, I get drunk and never get laid.
Okay, so we heard a lot of response from the audience. Jake, you first. What do you hear and what does it mean?
Well, one of the things about that recording, and we only played a little bit, if you listen to kind of the whole thing and look at the poem at the same time, there are actually lines there that didn't make it to like the quote-unquote canon version, whatever that canon version is. And this goes back a little bit to what Doug was saying, like there's no definitive version. Maybe this was still a work in progress. Maybe he was riffing and making things up a little bit on the spot, like that was definitely part of Ginsberg's kind of like early mode, where like certain lines would get tweaked in the moment. And I'm also thinking about a book. It's a book on improvisation by Derek Bailey, where he is a guitar player, where he says that the room and the space itself is as much of a part of the performance as everything else. And I think it just like it completely colors the experience. These slurry lines that Ginsberg is laying down, like he's not articulating, he's not lucid. It's flowing back and forth between him and the folks who are laughing at these lines. But some of them are not that funny, I thought. But
Well, I smoke
anyway.
marijuana every
It's more
chance I get is not
Yeah.
funny, but it is something that the audience kind of cheers.
Right. It's funny that they find it funny. Like that tells you. Yeah.
All right. Max, then Amaris, then Jess.
I'm interested in the way that humor gets used, not just in this performance, but I think throughout the beat poems that we read this week as a way of community building.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the beats have this sort of political project more or less explicitly in their work, and they're very consciously building a counterculture, right? And it seems to be built on this kind of both the joy of their writing and also this irreverence. Like laughter is very irreverent too, and they're often laughing at things that are the squares might think are very serious subjects, especially in Howl, where a lot of those lines are just hilarious and also like really kind of dark and disturbing too.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Amaris, your thoughts?
Yeah, like Jake, I noticed the riffing, which departed from the text version that we have. And I think it's very much Allen Ginsberg's commitment to the fidelity of the spirit of the beat poetry, that spontaneity, search for authenticity, for interaction and fluidity, and not this serious, solemn delivery, fixed text that we might find in previous movements. So I don't think there's a competition between the different versions that there might be. It's really the commitment to that spirit, which is the essence.
Thank you, Amaris. Jess, your thoughts? You do have things to say about this, for sure.
I have a few things to say. Just sort of picking up a few of the threads in the previous comments. The line $2.27. I'm not sure if it appears in the very beginning. It's like the first line or the second line or something, I think, and I'm not sure if it's in the printed version or if Ginsberg just included it there. And to me, that line is kind of devastating, actually, and it does produce fewer laughs, I think, from the audience. And it's it's a dollar amount. Why is it sad? But it's sad because it's pointing to the the value that can be attached to an amount of money, right? And what Ginsberg is trying to do is to put that out there, but then say, well, that's not the kind of value that he's interested. That's not the kind of significance that he's marking, and that's why I think it's that more than any other of the lines that were in that brief excerpt sort of struck me as it stuck out to me. It stuck out. That's why I say I'm not sure if it was originally placed there or if he just stuck it in there, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Because it really shifts the tone.
Yeah. Sophia Naz, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi. Do you have some thoughts about performance and the difference between listening and reading and that particular instance where the audience, you've read at festivals and conferences, and when you've read to an audience that was very much on your side, part of your community, you must have felt encouraged by them.
Yes,
and the question is, does it
absolutely.
change your poetry?
It absolutely does change your poetry. And this is a big reason why I think Beat Week is my favorite week, because it's in this poetry that there's a complete resonance with the orality, the spontaneousness, there's a kind of unstructured, bubbling up, the babble flow of it. That is very resonant with the South Asian tradition of poetry, where it's quite common to have, hundreds, if not thousands, of people in a room listening to poetry, So in that sense, this has always been my favorite week. And Ginsberg, he's feeding off of that. You feed off of that, and it definitely changes you, because you're no longer the poem has left you. It's leaped off your lips, and it now belongs to everybody, and that's an amazing moment. And I think that it's part of the incredible dichotomy of writing, something that is done so internally, but that it really is transformed in the presence of the people who really, take it and make it something else.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much. Thanks for calling. And we
Yes, it was a pleasure.
we have a book to send you. Would you like a book?
Oh, I would love a book.
Okay, here it is. It's Jerome Rothenberg's new and selected poems. Not new anymore because it's an old book. This is my extra copy. I don't know if Jerry signed it, but I'll have to check. But this is for you. So make sure that Anna gets your home address, which we probably already have.
She did.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Al.
Sophia. Whoa.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Doug, final thoughts on this question of performance, and then we're going to switch to a new topic. What do you think?
Well, I really want to amplify something that Amaris and Sophia had said during their comments about the kind of absence of competition between the different forms and versions, right? That it's not about one replacing the other, the text or the performance, and how that sort of fixity is an incursion on certain traditions of poetry. That the improvisational possibility is sometimes in direct tension, which also takes me back to, like Amber Rose's comment about, productive tensions, right? Like, what does it mean? And I think this also goes, to something Max said. What does it mean to be in a site of counterculture when you have one sort of cultural narrative, which is like, we're going to create this object, this book. We're going to create this canonical object, right? And this also ties to Jake. Yay, I'm tying everything. right. And whether the line appears in this one or another one, as Jess was saying, we're going to create this one version, and yet the version lives, and you can't hold it down, you can't pin it down, which also makes me think a little bit about, Bob Kaufman not always writing and making available in print that, his performances were recorded, and in an interesting way, in some ways, as somebody who was influenced by Bob Kaufman's work, I'm grateful, but also there's an ambivalence I feel around his performances being recorded and then transcribed, and so that becomes fixed.
Yeah.
Right. How does that improvisational flexibility, when it becomes the only recorded version, how that becomes canonical, in a certain kind of way of creating a text, a history, and becomes a version without other versions, right, present there. So just kind of thinking about all the comments that people were making, that kind of comes to mind.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Doug. What I think we should do next is see what people are tweeting about. And then, unless we're persuaded otherwise by some tweets, I think Doug's suggestion, mention of Bob Kaufman, makes sense for us to turn to jail poems. So, who's following the tweets? Lily, are you?
Yeah, I have an interesting one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Rama tweeted, I want to push back a little on what is conforming to thought. Maybe the most poetic thoughts are wordless. Maybe Dickinson is closer to real thought than Ginsberg or Kerouac. And then adds sort of an idea about, like, could cognitive science and neuroscience confirm what is a... But I like the part that is, how do we know that Ginsberg or Kerouac are closer to real thought than Dickinson is? Is like my restating of Rama's question.
The implication, of course, is that Dickinson did everything on the page and that she was not likely in her room to have orally performed her pieces. That's a really good question. Lily, will you yourself respond to that?
Sure.
Do you mind?
Yeah. I think I feel like you queued it up there, this idea of like the presence of another, like the idea of performativity with other people, versus performing something on the page as you're writing, whether that be in solitude or whether that be imagining that you will or won't have a future audience.
Yes.
Those are all different kinds of performance, and it might seem like we're privileging one over the other, but we're really just talking about movements where certain types of performance were more privileged, as in like preferred. We're more preferred than other types of performance. So we've gotten to a week here where oral performance out loud to at least a few other people at Min was the way, but with Dickinson that wasn't the case. But I would certainly still call her work performative, not in the negative sense, but as in she performed a version of herself. She performed a speaker. There was an orality to her work, even though it was written.
Rama did a great job of reminding us of something, because we get to this week and we get very enthusiastic about performance, which we're really seeing, holistically as part of the movement for the first time, and so we get excited, and everybody has to forgive us for seeming to privilege that, as sort of more spontaneous and more original. What I want to do before we turn to Bob Kaufman then is to get us to how you sound for a second, because Baraka didn't. I'm going to ask Dave. Is Dave Poplar with us? Did he join us?
Doesn't look like.
No. Okay. So I'm going to ask Erica and Davey to respond to this. And since Doug and I just talked about this, I'm sure that he and I will have something to add to this. So I would submit in response to Rama, Lily, that how you sound is not really talking about an audience and not really talking about, how you sound is kind of, right, Doug? It's really a self-identification piece about liberation from within, and that how you sound is a way of finding out who you are. Right? So what I'm going to do, Davey and Erica, is quote a couple of lines. And Jason, if you have a thought on this, please add. A couple of lines from how you sound, maybe as a response to this thing that Rama correctly mentions about our leanings this week. So how you sound, let's see. I make a poetry with what I feel is useful and can be saved out of all the garbage of our lives. My poetry, Davey, is whatever I think I am, right? And all that means that I must be completely free to do just what I want in the poem. So that is sort of using sound to include Dickinson, even though she's not a sound poet, right? Davey, your thoughts on this?
Something that's so lovely about Rama's question is that it raises questions of whose cognition is performed on the page and in the air, and the ways that a wide range of relationships to cognition get performed by the beat poets. I've been thinking a bunch this week with the Week 6 material about the work of a wonderful independent scholar named Lonnie Reynolds, who writes about the beats and disability, and writes about, wants to ask the question whether the beats utilize the disruptive potential of the disabled character in ways that are productive or ways that are problematic. And that's something that I think of really loudly with Howl, which is thematizing disability from its first line, and feels like a question that we have to ask if we're thinking about, with the language of in how you sound, my poetry is whatever I think I am. What conditions that thinking? What conditions the I that gets to make decisions about what I think I am? That's an I that's thinking with Amber Rose. That's always in relation. And what that I is in relation to helps us figure out what kinds of cognition get produced and whose they are to produce, and where that's productive and where that's a problem.
Fantastic. Thank you, Davey. Erica, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm kind of processing what Davey just said, which is fascinating, and I hadn't really thought about this question of cognition before. I think when I read this text and I think about performativity and authorship, and I would also add improvisation into this conversation. I think that one of the things that you see in the beats, and in Bob Kaufman in particular, is improvisation and the difference between what gets said and what makes it onto the page. And I'm just kind of sitting here thinking about an experience I had teaching how you sound. In the spring, I was doing a tutorial with a student, and this essay really kind of blew his mind and shifted what he understood to be acceptable writing. And it's really lines like, I make a poetry with what I feel is useful and can be saved out of the garbage of our lives. Like, that's a really powerful statement. It's a democratizing statement too. It's kind of inviting all eyes into that I, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Jason, a quick thought on this?
Yeah, following with Erica, that the I in the beats makes me think, I kind of get a little bit frustrated with the kind of way in which we canonize the beats, like that Ginsberg's performance is Ginsberg, or that it's kind of half of academia and half of commodification, that we get these individuals as authors, and it's not that their I becomes them instead of available to me. Like if I say my poetry is whatever I think I am, I can take that I unto myself, and that we have a reverence for performance that doesn't make space for everyone, for the performance as a script for one's own performance of self.
Wow. Wow. Okay, Doug, there's so much you could respond to. I'm sure you have many thoughts. What's one?
Well, there is this, the performance creates another form. I mean, the poetry reading is a form. It is a part of the reverence that you're talking about is this notion of authenticity, right? You know, what's the edict? First thought, best thought, right? Is that's the edict?
Kerouac.
That's Kerouac. But it's not first thought, true thought. It's not first thought, real thought, right? This best is not necessarily saying true or real, right? So the poetry reading is a form, just as the book is a form. It's a format. And, you know, we can go and see people like the Black Took Collective rupture that form. We could see lots of people at the time, these readers were rupturing that form, and people could look at that and could go, I can be that I can put that on. If we're creating a counterculture, if you're creating a counterculture that's actually meant to be something other than an exclusive club, which is one of the things I think your intention with in this moment, then it has to also be a model for how you can exist, right? Or else it's just a show, and it becomes a country club that we have membership in, and we're just trying to be cool, and you're a square, and you can't do it, right? But if you're actually creating something that's supposed to actually transform more than just your group of friends, then it has to be a way that you can move and exist in the world. So it is a form, and at that level, it's the authenticity of it gets like becomes a weird sort of fetishized thing. And that whole term, that whole concept, when you're dealing with art and artifice, like what is the real version? Improvisation, it's not like improvisation isn't going up and saying, I've never played piano before. Blang bong, bling bong, blah blah blah. Yeah, I'm doing jazz. That's not what's happening up there, right? You know, so there's a practice, right? There's a practice, which also means that there is a way of doing this thing. And you do this thing, and that's the way you undo this other thing, right? So that sense of being, doing what this person up here is doing now, that you can, and I don't mean put this on in like put on, but you can practice this, and that the act of practicing this is supposed to bleed out from beyond it's Wednesday night at the open mic, that now you're supposed to carry this on outside of this context. And what happens if you don't? What happens if you do this when you're in line to pay your light bill? What happens if you do this when you're thinking about who you're going to vote for? What happens if you do this, right? So I think that is one of the ways that I think about it. If your writing is a practice, if your performance is a practice, and it's a practice that you're picking up from a tradition, which literally means not just you, then how does it actually change the way you are in the world? And so that to me is really a resonant critique and a really important moment of intervening in the kind of lionization of making these individuals, because that also cordons them off and keeps them nice and safe from infecting other people.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and thinking of it as performance as a gift, rather than as a treasure.
Yeah. Okay. Gift versus treasure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you both. So let's turn probably away from the issue of performance to Bob Kaufman. And I wonder if I would ask Doug to read section 3, poem 3 in Jail Poems. And then I'm going to invite Amber Rose and Max and Jake and Erica to respond quickly each to this section 3 of Bob Kaufman's Jail Poems.
All right. Bob Kaufman, Jail Poems, section 3. In a universe of cells, who is not in jail? Jailers in a world of hospitals. Who is not sick? Doctors. A golden sardine is swimming in my head. Oh, we know some things, man, about some things, like jazz and jails and God. Saturday is a good day to go to jail.
That's amazing. Amber Rose, what do you think of that? Didn't give you a lot of time to think about it, but
No, I don't know. I love these poems. I love how they model a kind of relation. In that first line, in a universe of cells, who is not in jail? Yeah, I think what's useful about that line in particular is that he is sort of pointing a finger at folks who say, okay, only bad people are in jail, or that you can sort of box folks in based on their institutional connection, excuse me. So doctors, in hospitals, that there's supposed to be these particular forms of relationships between people and institutions, and that informs how we think about each other. But he's sort of saying, well, actually, all of this is containment. Like all of this is about boxes. And maybe I'm more free because I can see those boxes than you are because you think I'm the only one in a box.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Max, you want to follow up on that?
I keep thinking about the line "Saturday is a good day to go to jail." I think that Amber Rose had a great comment there about institutions and the way that they sort of inflect or articulate our relations to each other. And I'm just thinking about this sort of the kind of subversive idea or what kind of statement he's making by this sort of gleeful line about sort of submitting himself to incarceration, to going to jail, on a Saturday, on the weekend, and how, we might bring that into the present, especially as issues of incarceration and mass incarceration are more and more to the fore.
Yeah. Jake, I'd love to hear from you next, but I just want to maybe possibly steer you to a couple of phrases. The way universe and world are used in a universe of cells, in a world of hospitals, it's really an expansive view of the situation. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. To me, the expansiveness, the world of this poem is going through different registers or maybe like sub forms. Like it starts out with 2 colon response lines, right? Question and a quick answer. Then there's a golden sardine is swimming in my head, which is like so lyrical and beautiful and surreal, and then the next line, we know some things, man, about some things, and it's such vernacular. And then Jazz and Jails and God, which is like all of a sudden like a constellation of these things that are sonically related, thematically related, just like he beautifully presents it. And then that final line, which is so odd and dark, like Saturday is a good day to go to jail. I think it's almost like it's so short, this little segment, but within it, there are worlds like this golden sardine that's swimming in his head. So indicative of like this creative process, the glimmering of inspiration that just goes through so many registers within the span of so few lines.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jake. Erica, your thought on this?
I'm struck by the line breaks and the way that the line breaks kind of create a sort of emancipatory power in the poem. So, like if you look at the first two lines, in a universe of cells, who is not in jail, jailers. In a world of hospitals, who is not sick, doctors. So there's something going on in the way that those lines are crafted that's screwing with the subject-object relationship of what's being said. Mm. And there's also something happening where, like, the experience, a stigmatized experience becomes a universal experience, which I think is a really powerful and radical thing to do in such a tiny poem.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the list of poems from the main syllabus, and then I'm just going to look around to see the facial reactions to where we should go, what poem we should talk about, or what poet we should talk about next. So here goes. We have Ginsberg's Howl. We don't need to talk more about Ginsberg today. Kerouac's Essentials, Spontaneous Prose and Belief and Technique, his prose stuff. Kerouac, October in the Railroad Earth, and his Babel Flow. Kaufman's Jail Poems, we just talked about. Creeley's I Know a Man, not a beat poem, but seems to be responsive to the beats. Anne Waldman's Rogue State. Rogue State. Amiri Baraka, his Incident, which is a response to Cullen's Incident. It's not really a beat poem, but the Baraka we encounter here, we encounter the 50s Baraka, so he could, it's bad categorization, but there he is. And Jane Cortez's She Got, He Got. In ModPo Plus, we have Ferlinghetti. We're not going to talk about him. We have Clark Coolidge, Blues for Alice. We have some more Kerouac, Old Angel Midnight. We have Helen Adam. Woo! We have Frank Lima, Elise Cowan, Ruth Weiss. Lily and I did a walk and talk in the park there in San Francisco with these guys trailing after us in their camera. They were propping the camera up on a roller bag because we had no dolly. And as we came around the last turn talking about Ruth Weiss, there were people near us talking about Ruth Weiss, some old colleagues of Ruth Weiss. And isn't this true? I'm not making this up, right?
That's true.
And suddenly, and they're in the film like Ruth Weiss. We know Ruth. She lives down the corner, Oh, weird. There's some Joanne Kiger. There's more Bob Kaufman. There's Philip Whalen. There's Gary Snyder. There's John Wieners. There's even Jerry Rothenberg. So that's all ModPo Plus. But I'm looking around, and I don't know how to interpret looks to refer to a poem. Davey, pick.
Jane Cortez.
Jane Cortez. Why don't I play a couple of minutes or seconds of this amazing performance, and then we can talk a little bit about it. So let's see. I think it's a YouTube video. I'm going to skip forward, okay?
Hot, 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 hot again. Got to be a hot skeleton in the latest hot fashion. Got to be a hot feminist turning into a hot cultural investigative gadfly. Got hot. Got hot. She got hot. She got hot. She got hot and got like a hot exile flying into alcoholic tantrums on hot buses. Got hot, got hot, got hot. She got hot, she got sad, she got hot, she got crazy, she got hot, she got athletic, she got hot, she got impatient, she got hot, she got used, she got hot without sweat, she got hot without heat, she got hot like a hot young volcano, got hot.
Okay, we're going to skip forward to the he section.
Agent. He got cold, cold, cold. He got cold without ever having imagined that he'd be so cold and wooden and cold and untropical and cold and plastic and cold and mute and cold and ferocious and cold and rigid and cold while watching the sunshine and cold while kissing himself in the mirror and cold and removed and cold and swollen and cold and dependent on being so cold. He got cold.
I really picked that last part well. So let's go with Davey, Jess, Jason, and then we'll see where we are. I also want to invite Doug to comment on this. So, Davey, we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's worth going further.
And I think there are cool things to say about it in dialogue with having just talked about jail poems. And I'm still thinking about, Amber Rose, something you were saying about jail poems really thinking about who has a relation to institutions, and something Erica was saying about like jailers and doctors being the folks who get to determine what institutional power looks like, which makes me think about a lot of the like more resistant, more like maybe productively resistant poems in week 6 as being about taxonomy and being about who gets to produce taxonomies, who gets to delineate, who gets to divide with language, gets to categorize, gets to produce relevant forms of categorizable knowledge and knowledge in categories, in the way that cells and hospitals are both forms of categorization of information, of matter and knowledge. And that's exactly what's happening in the Jane Cortez poem, of Jane Cortez pushing against what are the taxonomies for talking about received normative gender roles? How do those taxonomies work? And where do they really break down? And if we like hold up hot and cold and like tessellate them and move them around and like let the light flow through them in different ways, where do they show us how deeply insufficient our language for normative gender is?
Period. Mm-hmm. That was the greatest paragraph I've ever heard, and it ended exactly right. Davey. Jess, your thoughts? What are you doing with that? I love the tessellating light that gets between cold and hot. I mean, wow, synesthesia, baby.
Yes. I love those. I love that. I love that comment, Davey. The exposure of like the inadequacy of existing taxonomies for received gender roles. That like wasn't what I was thinking about as we listened to that excerpt. I think because I was still sort of stuck on our previous conversation about performance and Doug's comment about like the form of a performance, like providing a model for a way of existing. And when you said that, that made me think about the different kinds of models that can be on offer, thinking back to Jason's comment about our reverence for performance that doesn't make a place for everyone. So that made me think that there are certain kinds of performance that give us a model, that give us models for being, and there are other kinds of performances that give us models for being with others, being together, being in relation with others, being in some kind of totality or collective with, people that are different but nonetheless, joined. And this might not have anything to do with it, but I was thinking and kind of being bothered by something that Jack Kerouac says about craft, which is that it's a concealing of feelings. And like listening to that, and thinking about it as a practice, and to me, I think about the word craft because I had this crazy dance teacher once who was in the Martha Graham Company, and he was like, dance is my craft, it's craft. And he made us do all these weird exercises where we like said what we kept in like the pocket of our collarbone or something. And like to him, craft was like the revelation of feeling and not its concealment. And to me, like, that's what we're seeing in all of this work, which is bizarre because it just goes against what Kerouac is saying. And I guess I'm laying my cards out there on the table, re my feelings about Kerouac.
There you go.
I think they're shared feelings.
There you go.
Decks and stacks of cards that have been laid out on the table here, this very table. Jason, and then I'd invite Doug to comment on this.
Yeah, I think what struck me the most in listening to that piece of performance is the repetition and the musicality of it, and thinking back to the laughter in the background of the other of the Ginsberg, and just thinking about laughter being like a somewhat involuntary bodily expression, and the way in which repetition is a bodily experience, and that and Cortez is talking about hot and cold, and about the kind of state of a body, and letting us participate not only certainly with, because once you repeat hot enough times, it becomes a musical term, but it also becomes heat itself. And I can imagine just listening to that, or even just proximately hearing the laughter in the other room, I can feel a kind of physical a non-intellectual physical participation with the other people in the room, and a kind of community, ceremonial kind of communal experience that is not one that we normally have in this world.
So beautifully said. Doug, a quick thought. You can respond to this or anything, really. Despite what we've said, Davey most fabulously and directly, about the tessellation, the back and forthing of these terms, if she's really breaking it all down, there is ultimately a privileging of heat over cold. Absolutely. Because that's just in the language. And what Jason just said, and typically what he does say, this is a thing for him, when the body does work, when the poet's body does work, and Doug and I were watching the YouTube, I think Amber Rose could see it too, the rest of you were listening to the sound, but she's really pouring out, and she is sweating, it's a hot room, and her body is generating heat. Right. So hot, hot, hot is really going to be, the more the body works to create a poem, the more hot is better than cold, with all the traditional connotations of cold being unfeeling and so forth, impersonal and so forth. Doug, what are your thoughts about any of this?
But that's the thing, right? Ms. Cortez is working in a space where the traditional understanding of cold was already destabilized by the vernacular understanding of cold as cold or cool. Right. So she is actually undoing the rhetorical status of the cold, cool male.
That's interesting.
And returning it to, she's stripping it of its rhetorical power within that rhetorical tradition.
Doug.
And that's that taxonomy. So what she is doing is she is taking the rhetorical power, which was at first taken through a larger Afro-diasporic vernacular tradition, rhetorical tradition, so taking it from one layer of power, which is a Eurocentric, white-centered, white supremacist layer of power. And then she is destabilizing that again through a masculinist space where that power was dictated, and saying, you're not cool. You're not even cold. You're cold. And then giving it back to them, basically forcing that genealogy back on them. You're not a cool black man. You're just the man. So, yeah.
Doug. That was amazing. This is amazing. All right, look, there's a lot of us, and it's 1:00, so I think we should do final thoughts. I think we should go all the way around. So this will be not your usual quick final thought. I have an office hour coming up, but a real thought about what we're doing. And I wonder if we could get warmed up. Are you okay with this?
Oh, I don't mind.
Okay, there's a poem. Warmed up. There's a poem called "Runaway Tongue" that Doug has written, created, and put in a field. I've never heard him perform it, but I imagine it could happen. I wonder if, just to warm us up for the final thoughts, Doug would perform "Runaway Tongue," and then we'll go around, starting with Erica. We'll go around and get final thoughts, and I know that'll take us to the end. So, Doug, you're okay reading this?
I'm okay reading this, and I just have to say one thing before I begin. Like that final comment was secretly like co-inhabited, co-strengthened. I had to come correct because Yolanda Wisher just walked into the room.
Yeah. By the way, Yolanda Wisher is here. Hi, Yolanda. Here you are.
So if I had half-stepped, I would have caught it. Runaway Tongue. Broken black gone broke to the cane break. Get it, get it, get it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Get it, get it, get it, get it, get it. The cane breaks English, breaking, broker. Get it, get it, get it. By the cane breaking open, the broken's break. Get it, get it, get it. The cane breaking by the cane breaking open, the broken's brains. Get it, get it, get it. You expect a well-wit coach for cunnilingus? Get it, 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 get it. What I say was I meant what I had say was what I meant when I say what. Get it, get it, get it, get it, get it. When do the fugitive cold switch to F-fugitive? Get it, 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 get it. Get it. The blacks broke English, Brooks break-ins on the breakers English, breaking breakers breaking. What? But get it, 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 get it. Keen black tongues, keen what they can kin, canny. Canines can't scan they lines through tongues fin. Blacks break for that great tungsten hung. Get it up north, gone bog. What? Open, dog them in the break. Get it, open, get it, get it, get it, get it. Get it? Get it? Break!
Thank you, Doug. Oh, how are we going to follow Runaway Tongue? Anybody got a Runaway Tongue out there for final thoughts? Erica, sorry you have to go follow this, but Erica, and then we'll go to Jess. You get it?
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing. Doug, I teach your work all the time. I love, you're brilliant. I guess my final thought is to urge people to take a look at Doug's book, Mess and Mess And I'm thinking now about a quote from a piece from that book that's on jacket 2, Repetition and Revulsion.
Yes.
And the quote reminds me of the conversation that we were having around performance and improvisation. These improvisations are not synecdoches of that work. They're an additional work. Neither work is static. They grow as they strain, as they grow till. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Jess, you're up next, and then we'll go to Jake Marmer.
Yeah, this is going to be improvised. Thanks, Doug, for that performance. Yeah, I definitely can't follow it. But I guess what I will say, in just sort of a more reflective key about like ModPo and being involved with ModPo, and everyone knows this is my first year being involved with ModPo, and it's been wonderful. And I think that insofar as we're up here every week, like improvising and performing together, we are like making a model for how to be together. And I think that that's like, for me, it's been a pleasure and a joy each week.
Jess. Wow, this is going to get harder and harder. Jake Marmer, you're next.
Yeah, wow. I love that we had a performance of a poem here. That was a fantastic way to wrap up a webcast. I want to, as a final thought, go back to something Doug mentioned earlier, talked about reading form. And Dougie said something to the effect of, like, we model a way of being in a poetry reading that could be utilized elsewhere. And I really love that. And I love thinking about poetry readings as a ritual, ritualized form, and maybe even like sacred ritual, and more that way than anything else, in my life. For example, just going to the readings to see these poets I revere live and experience it, and the pleasure of reading the beats and thinking about the beats is knowing that they really brought the ritual of poetry reading back to the readers. And I agree, Jess, with your earlier critique of Kerouac, but just responding to what had come before him, he was really creating an opportunity for that kind of wild, prophetic, free-flowing poetry reading that we heard those voices in the very first recording that Al played. The folks were all in, and it was a sacred ritual for them.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks so much. I want to go to Lily and then Claire for final thought. Lily?
I've been thinking a lot through this webcast and in rereading Beat Week readings and performances about exactly what Jess brought up about this difference between craft and improvisation, and like how they're not actually so different from each other. And like Doug was mentioning, that to improvise you have to have a practice. And so I guess what I'm like quoted in many places on ModPo as being like a not Beat Week, not my favorite. But what I will say that this webcast has really made me think about and appreciate is the way in which neurodivergent or more marginal thinkers and voices are able to participate in the world of craft and practice through Beat Week in a way that in its ways of accepting and favoring different types of performance, different types of writing, different types of thinking. The way that we take that work really seriously in ModPo is something that I love about Beat Week. So I don't mean to like only be a naysayer about. There's a lot of things I like about it. It's really more of like, Jess's objections to Kerouac, shared objections to Kerouac, etc. But like, yeah, that's where I stand on what we talked about today.
Thank you, Lily. Mm-hmm. We're going to go to Claire, who is our very first ModPo intern, and then I'd like to go to Max. And after that, I wonder if Claire can get the mic to Yolanda, who doesn't know that she's going to offer a final thought, but we'll have a minute to think about it. Claire, hi.
Hi. I think something that I've always thought about with poetry, and especially like teaching poetry, is the importance of performance in a way that like performance is one of the many ways to expose the different interpretations of poetry. Like having various people read the same poem, you get those different readings. So I think having this whole webcast kind of be oriented around performance, again, like emphasizes that idea of like different perspectives are exposed through just how we read it and how we pause. And there's only so much you can get from like a line break visually than you do from like a breath and a pause. So when it comes to like teaching poetry, especially to new poets, new poetry readers, is like the importance of having not only reading aloud, but having different people read it aloud. So I think that was a really great emphasis on my ideas, yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire. We're going to go to Max and then Yolanda. Hi, Max.
Continuing on the topic of performance, I just want to go back or paraphrase Doug's comment from the beginning of the webcast about the way that performance affects time, slowing it down, changing our perception of it. And that feels so necessary in our modern world where time can be a very stifling phenomenon. And now I'm really interested in thinking about this idea of performance in the beats in the mid 20th century, this sort of post-war moment, the postmodern moment where sort of corporate capitalism is really ramping up to its new heights, and the way that this sort of intervention or refusal of a kind of conventional sense of time is sort of reemerging here.
Thank you, Max. That was great. Yolanda, hi.
Hi.
You weren't here the whole time, but I'm sure you have lots of thoughts about what you heard.
So many thoughts. My final thought is a memory that I have of the Germantown Poetry Festival in 2007, where Davy Niddle was a student on a stage, probably for the first time in front of the entire neighborhood, reciting poetry. And Doug Kearney was a guest poet who was opening up for the young bloods at this festival. And it's really amazing to see the two of them sitting together. And I feel like I planted a seed many, many, many years ago that has blossomed here at ModPo. So good to be here.
I love that. Such a wisharian thing to do, which is to make your final word about the connection between others. Thank you for that and for being such a communitarian, Yolanda. For those who don't know, Yolanda has been activist poet in Philly, in the Philly area for many years, and was recently the poet laureate of the city of Philadelphia. Thanks for stopping in. So we're going to go, sorry I didn't prep you for this, Amaris next, then Anna. Amaris, hi.
Hi. I'm still thinking about, Davy's comment about categories, categorizations, who gets to create those taxonomies, because that does seem to be, a relevant attention seems to be too small of a word to put on it. And while I do think that those are useful, tools for thinking about poetry in the world, we did cover a set of false dichotomies throughout the course of this webcast between, what would be considered craft versus authentic, spontaneous production of poetry, hot versus cold, man versus woman, of course. And I think that's, the project of the Beats is to multiply the forms of expression and to, allow for more space and more access to expression than was available in previous movements. And as long as we have those categories, they don't have to be, imprisoning people within them, but allowing them to just define poles on a spectrum.
Thank you, Amaris. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today, too. Anna, final thought, and then we will go to Davy.
So I just wanted to, something that happened in my office hours this week that was really fun is I got to talk about Elise Cowan, who's a ModPo Plus poet for this week. Herself, just really a great poet, although unfortunately she's usually just known as like Ginsberg's typist and temporary lover. But she's a really great poet. And the reason it's really fun to think about Elise in Beat Week is that she was really interested in Emily Dickinson. And a lot of her poems are like creating this kind of like cross-generational, intergenerational kinship with Emily Dickinson as poet. So I just wanted to read an Elise poem just by way of concluding. It's sort of titled, I Had a Dream of Mercy. And I think you'll hear the Dickinsonian ballad meter thing happening in here. It's just so good. I had a dream of mercy. It was gray simplicity, never one of love, until you made for me a plum scroll, a green automobile, and better than peaches. So good.
Fantastic. Yeah, Elise Cowan does helps us understand that the typical Beat lineage back to Whitman can have an alternative scope, which is a lineage back to Dickinson. Yeah, and that works. And Cowan does such a great job with that.
Just thought I'd bring some Dickinson to Beat Week.
Yeah, there you go. Davy, then Amber Rose, then Jason, then Al. Davy, final thoughts. And then Doug. I forgot Doug. Sorry, Doug before Al.
A preface or frame to my final thought. Yolanda was the first person who taught me Jane Cortez 15 years ago when I think, you can corroborate this, Yolanda, you were younger than I am now. I think that is true. So that's an amazing thing to think about. And that has been like a whole lifetime of a gift. So thank you. I mean, that's really, that's something that I've carried with me forever. And that's a cool thing to be able to thank your teachers. You don't always get to do that. So thanks. The other thing that it occurs to me to say, Doug, in dialogue with something that you were saying about the poetry reading being a space to model a way of being with others, is to hang out with and put pressure on which others. And to think about the poetry reading as a space where as soon as you're using language in public and drawing a lot of attention to that language, you're engaging in a little bit of a taxonomic project of your own. Are those human others? Are those non-human others? What human others? In what way? In what context? In what language? And something that I love about the Beat Week poems, for as much as I, like Lily, have some issues with Beat Week, is that they really disagree with each other about the kinds of taxonomy they're interested in engaging in. That Ginsberg certainly does in Howl, a kind of Whitmanian thing of wanting to imagine being with all others. And the issue that we take with Whitman as we carry him through the 10 weeks of this course is that his others aren't our others. And his others are a really incomplete set of others. And yet that impulse is something that folks wrestle with really productively. And we see some of the most productive ways of wrestling with that tradition of thinking about what others do I want in the room with me? Who do I want to be visible within my language? And how do I use the space of the poem and differently the space of the poetry reading to insist on the others I want to be able to recognize?
Thank you, Davey. That was fantastic. And there's some snaps coming there. So let's go to Amber Rose. Final thought?
We've had some great final thoughts already. I'm
best.
I think what's on my mind, like Amaris, I've been thinking about all of the sort of dichotomies that we've been trying to hold in balance in this webcast. And following up Davey's final thought on being with others, I'm thinking about how these poets are helping me think about being with myself, and where being with others informs how I'm able to be with myself. I was quickly looking for like something fantastic that Jane Cortez has said, and I came across this interview, and someone's asking her about leadership, and she says, "As a poet, I lead myself." And in How You Sound, Baraka says something similar, which is like the only tradition I have to follow is myself. And I think that's really powerful, especially when taxonomies and dichotomies are sort of how we orient ourselves in the world. But if we know that those things are fractured and leave folks out and are inadequate to sort of map out our experience, what happens if we let those things fall away and just sort of follow our own map? I think that's a really powerful poetic impulse and imperative.
That's great. Doug and I were talking before we went on the air, talking about another alternative reading of sound and How You Sound, which is to sound as in sounding, to discern what's at the bottom of you, not so much to sound for others, but to actually sound yourself. And this is what you've been saying about that. This is where you got to begin. This is what Jane Cortez was talking about. Jason and then Doug, final thoughts.
Yeah, there's in official zoological taxonomy.
Is his mic on? I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm. Is it on?
It's breaking up.
It's breaking up. Do you want to come and grab Davey's mic?
Yeah.
We had that problem last night with that mic, by the way.
Well, this is in part to riff off of what Davey was saying. So
if you sat in Amber Rose's seat.
Exactly. It's part of what I was talking about.
I know. You're always way ahead of me.
That in biological taxonomy, like if you read Linnaeus, it doesn't read like poetry. It's about, there's a word in biology for the holotype, which is a single specimen of a species that is preserved or frozen and kept as the reference object by which all other possible members of that species are compared. And I think that, if that was clear, that what we're doing is fighting against the idea of the holotype that, and Lily was talking about neurodiversity, and what does it mean for, I mean, there are all sorts of taxonomies in our world, like even in psychology, and I love the line in Bob Kaufman's poem where the line break is, "Doctors, a golden sardine is swimming in my head. Oh, we know some things, man, about some things," and so forth. And what is it to then take a golden sardine is swimming in my head and to put it in a cell? It is a universe not of only being in jail, but of cells multiplying and dividing and becoming new and making mistakes and becoming further new. Because what the Linnaeus couldn't understand was evolution and the way that species were not static, but always becoming something else.
Whoa, Jason. You know, Doug, I don't know, these final words, it's starting to become a thing that just, it's like a webcast in itself and needs to be transcribed. Doug, thank you, by the way, for doing this today. It's really, boy, we're just ramped us all up, and it's been great. Do you have some final thoughts you want to share with us?
I've used a lot of the time, so I'm just gonna say I've been working with a lot of improvisational musicians, and improvisation is like a practice of listening and knowing when it's your turn to be responsible for speaking, making sound, but even when you're doing that, you're listening. So thank you for letting me listen with y'all today.
You are the best at it. Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much. So before I thank everybody, my final thoughts are really a shout out to two people, or really one to a person who needs some support, and the other is really a memorialization. T. De Los Reyes, who's a dear friend of ours, she's in Manila. She's had to evacuate. I think it's typhoon related. I can't really figure it out, but T is sort of coming and going. So she's been evacuated from her place, and she's with some friends for a couple of weeks, and her connection is spotty. There's been a lot of talk among the CTAs about supporting T. If T, I know you're watching because it's the middle of the night and that's what you do. Please let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you. Whatever we send over there will take months, but maybe there's something we can say or some people we can contact to help you. I don't know what your situation is, but I had a sense from what you wrote to us that it's a pretty dire situation there. So, and this is not the first time that T has been displaced by weather, let's say, climate, I should say. And secondly, to Liz Watson. So I mentioned that Liz had passed away last week, but it was such fresh news that I hadn't really had a chance to think about it. Liz never met, I don't think, any of her ModPo friends, but Michelle Bethke, Sharon Wells, Mark Jackson, a whole bunch of people, not just in the UK, but elsewhere. They became close friends with Liz Watson, and whose cancer diagnosis was kind of kept from most of us. Until her husband John contacted us, we didn't even know that this was happening, most of us. And so I went to, so Sharon Wells provided me the link to all of Liz's contributions to ModPo over the years. There were 65 posts, and I'd like to read one of them. It's Liz's response a couple years ago to Zara's cut-up to make a Dadaist poem. She found a website that would make the cut-up, so she didn't do it with her scissors. Here's what was before, and then here's what's after, and this is to the memory of Liz Watson. Then I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I am enjoying this MOOC on modern poetry. I am discovering many writers who are new to me. Some of it is crazy. So far, my favorite poets are Dickinson, Niedecker, and Armentrout. So much to read, so little time. Then, when the late Liz Watson cut it up, here's how it sounds. So am and who, so are to Dickinson. Favorite, so some modern to me. This crazy. Are much Armentrout. It little on read, poetry. Far, I of Niedecker is mook. Enjoying am poets, new to my writers, discovering I many. So here's to Liz and Liz's friends. Friends are possible in a massive open online course. Thanks to Jess. Thank you, Jess. Lily, Amber Rose, you're amazing. Jason, you too. Holy shit, that final thought. It's going to take me a while to process it. Davey, Erica, Jake, Max, Amaris, Yolanda for stopping by, Mandana, Greg, Jeff, Breyer, Claire, Anna. Thank you all. And the tech people, holy cow, this is a lot harder than people realize. Yay. You guys are amazing. Thank you all. So we're going to see you in a week, next Wednesday. I don't know what time, but it's great that people are starting to show up in Philly. You're welcome anytime. Thanks. And Doug Kearney, this has been such a great pleasure. Thank you. Can anybody get some snaps for Doug? Yeah, and there's some shouting too. Doug, thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Have a great day, wherever you are.